Hello, everybody. I'm John Atack to this very day. And this is my dear friend and colleague, Chris Kilham. Hi, Chris.
Hey, John, good to talk with you across the big pond.
Yeah, it is a big pond, isn't it? I've actually taken one of those aeroplane things across it, and it takes hours, you know?
I've been doing that regularly for a long time, but especially more recently
Mm.
with regular trips to Kew, where I've been doing some work, and also to France, where I've been doing a lot of field work. So
Mm.
I'm kind of used to zipping back and forth across the Atlantic.
Yeah. Well, there's a period in the 80s into the early 90s when I got used to it, but now I stay at home and sulk. It's the best thing. So, what are you working on? Tell us something of what you're working on.
Well, I've been doing a lot of medicinal plant travel, which, as you know, is kind of my main
Mm.
thing. I have been working with a company in France called Burkhem, who I've actually known for 30 years, but we really didn't kind of engage with each other until about a year ago. And on their behalf, I've been, increasingly all over the place, going to growers of things like lemon balm and mint and which you go to southern France, you go to some of these kind of far out there country places, people have some of the most beautiful farms I have ever seen in my
Mm.
life. And I love being around growers and I love seeing what they're doing. And so that has been very wonderful. We had a pretty, I'm going to say, sketchy trip to Cameroon. A lot of Africa, I mean, I've been in many parts of Africa. A lot of Africa is not that safe,
Yeah.
at least not that safe for people who look like me. And so that was a kind of an intense trip. It was based on cocoa.
Mm.
And we went to some plantations and we went to one place that was really quite spectacular, although it might not sound it. The port of Douala, which is their
Mm.
big shipping port, is where the cocoa from Cameroon goes out to the rest of the world. So you have these warehouses there that have thousands of tons of cocoa bean sacks in them, which is just massive to see. And so I was, I mean, I love all of these plant related activities, whether it's seeing people harvesting in the field or, watching gigantic shipping. When you
Mm.
really get a sense of the scale
Yeah.
of things like cocoa and coffee, it's very sobering. I think Cameroon is fourth largest cocoa exporter in the world.
Mm.
And so, they just do many, many hundreds of thousands of tons of cocoa, which is on an unimaginable amount, actually.
Yeah.
We had, predictably, as so often happens, we had terrible car problems, and in some some very dangerous, remote, dark, out there circumstances that were not preferable at all. But I figure anytime I get to come back in one piece and talk about it humorously, it has gone well.
Mm.
So, and I've got more coming up, more trip to France in a couple of weeks and Norway to investigate fish oil of all things, and then Vietnam for coffee. You may know this, John, but do you know that Vietnam is the second largest coffee producing nation in the world?
I had no idea.
Oh, they came from out of nowhere
Mm.
about, I don't know, 30 years ago or so. And yeah, now they export something like 1.79 million tons of coffee every year. So I'm going to investigate coffee in the central hills of Vietnam, which should be picturesque and beautiful. And I'm sure the food will be wonderful as well. So that's kind of what I'm up to. And I'm writing when I'm not getting on or off a plane and trying to spend some time with my wife and maybe catch a little bit of vacation up in Maine, I think in about a week or so.
Yeah.
That's what's going on here.
Yeah. I, I'm fascinated that, you know, cocoa, of course, through childhood and many people still believe that chocolate is a bad thing. And it's the sugar that's the bad thing.
Oh
the
yeah.
the
Oh yeah.
chocolate is medicinally good. It's also, of course, got all sorts of other ingredients in it. And one thing that interests me, we have a thing um, called the Illegal Highs Bill in this country, brought in by Theresa May before she became Prime Minister. And it basically was, oh, well, how can we make anything illegal that makes you feel happy? Because
Right.
yeah, we need to do that because obviously it's not good for people to feel happy. And if my understanding's correct, and you will know this, um, cocoa contains an analog of the delta 9 THC, contains a small quantity of an analog. Is that true?
Um, if it does, I haven't seen that in the literature, which doesn't mean that it doesn't, but it
Yeah.
contains phenethylamines, which are psychoactive. It contains dopamine, which is
Mm.
psychoactive. And it, yeah, actually, no, now that you mention it, it does have something similar to anandamide, which
Yeah.
is the
Right.
endogenous, cannabinoid that we manufacture in our bodies.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's
And
like,
is vital to our existence. So the thing is that therefore, and I hate to say this, and it won't affect you there in the US, but in the UK, chocolate's illegal. So
but it's still
don't
there,
buy it, don't sell it.
right? Yeah, no, this is, I went a few years ago to a French-based policy meeting for 2 days on the urgent need to control nutritional supplements. And it was a bunch of policy wonks, none of whom had any industry experience, none of them actually knew the trade. None of the people who are the real experts had been invited to this group, and it was the most stultifying, weird thing. It was as though they were working themselves into a panic
Mm.
about common items that people have been consuming for thousands of years in large quantities. It was frankly sort of horrifying.
Mm.
And I think we see a lot of people. It seems to be concentrated in Britain and in the EU. These policy groups desperate to quote, protect the public from things from which we need absolutely no protection.
Mm.
I mean, I've worked since 1998 with Maca, which
Mm.
comes from the Peruvian Andes and is a food that people have grown and consumed for over 2,000 years.
Yeah.
And they make it into cakes and cookies and pies and soups and sauces and stews and breads and pastries of all different kinds and drinks of all different kinds. And people grow up eating maca as a staple food.
Mm.
And it's remarkably safe and it makes you feel really good. And you've got the working group of the European, it's called the European Working Group, looking at, they're terrified that anything other than a microscopic amount of maca could be devastatingly bad for human health. I don't know where they come up with these ideas. I don't know where they get these lavishly sick psychotic fantasies. I have no idea. But we see this is a pervasive thing, actually.
Oh, yes.
These policy wonks just kind of going off into space with absolutely no tether to what's happening on planet Earth, what the real science is, what the experts have to say, and frankly, what the common usage is.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, it seems like a kind of mass sociogenic illness that is very pervasive. I've been fascinated for a long time with prohibition, the idea of prohibiting substances.
Right,
Um,
right,
I started reading about it 50 years ago, and I keep going back to it. And
right,
so, the Volstead Act and the prohibition of alcohol, and we find out that led to at least a doubling of deaths from alcohol poisoning over what
right,
had been
right.
happening before,
Sure.
because of bathtub gin and all of this. And of course, it gave us the FBI pretty much
Right,
as a dreadful organization under L. Ron Hoover, as Frank Zappa used to call him. Um, and it gave us these attitudes. But looking at the prohibition of cannabis particularly, which is safer to talk about than other
Right,
substances.
right.
But, as you know, in the 1890s, you had the largest survey of drugs ever performed up until that time, about
The
10,000
Shaughnessy
people.
study. The Shaughnessy
Yeah,
study in India. Yeah, for
the
pain.
India hemp drugs,
Right.
um, where
Hemp drug.
where where you have an investigation. There were 500 people who were said to have cannabis psychosis, Indians in asylums, and on investigation, they found that these people had been diagnosed by the police who arrested them. None of them had seen a doctor. It proved that more than half of them had never taken cannabis, and that it
Right.
was like if somebody looked a bit, wobbly on the street, police would say cannabis psychosis. So they determined in 8 or 9 volumes or whatever it was, that there was no such thing. Then it
Mhm.
came back in Egypt in 1923. They go to the League of Nations and say this is driving people mad.
Right.
And the evidence was based. Egypt was a mandate of the British government, so it was being
Mhm.
run. So the head of the asylums was, I think, a Scotsman, but he didn't speak Arabic. He'd not done one interview, and so the League of Nations vote. Britain abstains, and away we go. Everybody's happy. Then the next year, 1924, the Canadian Assembly bans cannabis, and
Mhm.
they ban it on the grounds of a novel called The Black Candle, published under the name Janie Cannock,
Ah,
which was the pseudonym of a juvenile magistrate. I mean, she was a magistrate for juveniles. She wasn't herself a juvenile. Let's just clarify that, though
right,
her
right.
ideas were somewhat juvenile. And what she says in that novel is that white women who smoke cannabis will miscegenate the white race. That's they will go out, find people of other races with whom to breed, and will have multicolored children. And this is a terrible thing. And
Yeah.
Canada banned cannabis on, as far as I can understand, that basis. 4 years later, Britain followed suit because Canada had done it.
Right, right. And then, of course, you had Henry Anslinger basically singing the same song in the US that, white women were getting it on with Mexican and other men of color, and that this was all due to demon cannabis.
Hmm.
What one of the things that's, well, has happened here, I live in Massachusetts, and it's been legal to grow cannabis here for several years now.
Hmm.
And what happened when it went from being illegal to legal is nothing. The only thing that changed was that people who had been making a living selling cannabis no longer were making a living because all of a sudden there was a superabundance of cannabis in the market. I mean, right now, I've got a grow area in the front yard with 9 plants, one of which is now like 11 feet tall, two more in the front of the porch. The yield will be monstrous, laundry hampers of the stuff. You can't sell it. That's still not legal. So I wind up giving it away, but there have been no problems, no increase in crime, no increase in mental disorders, car accidents, you name it. Life has gone on as usual, except that now people aren't paying $300 an ounce.
Hmm.
So, so it's really a kind of a crazy thing when you see how this actually works out when people just go, okay, we're done persecuting folks for this. It's legal now. Okay. All of my friends grow.
Hmm.
Nobody has problems.
But yeah, I mean, the second year after legalization in Colorado and Washington State were the first states to
Yeah.
fully
Yeah.
legalize. Um, the second year, they monitored a number of statistics, and crime went down. And that
Yeah.
wasn't just because they weren't busting people for cannabis. Violent crime went down.
Right.
The use of alcohol dropped by 11%, which
Right.
is an amazing. And of course, road accidents went down. And
Yeah.
I mean, we have this thing here, the cannabis psychosis thing. I had a conversation just a few weeks ago with a highly intelligent human being who assured me that there's this thing called cannabis psychosis. And I said, well, yes, it's a short term thing. Somebody who smokes, who uses perhaps 100 times a regular dose of cannabis on a daily basis over a period of days or weeks will succumb to cannabis psychosis. If you think about alcohol in the same terms, that's like drinking 200 glasses of wine a day. That's
That's more
the
than
dosage
I want
equivalent.
to drink.
And what happens is they'll be crazy for a few days. And if they ever go near cannabis again, it will trigger a psychotic reaction. But the
Mm.
idea, I had a doctor a few months ago assure me that you can get brain damage from a single episode with cannabis. And my jaw dropped. It's like, you're a doctor. I've been studying the literature on this 50 years. I have never, in the last 3 years, I've read 3 books by professors about cannabis.
Right.
And none of them even mention the possibility of brain damage. We
No.
have this kind of, it's like, it's superstition. It's, let's pull it into our time and say it's like the belief in witches and enchantment and
Yeah.
spells, that these
Yeah.
substances have this mad, malicious animal magnetism, which
Right.
will
Right.
seep into our society.
Yeah.
On psychosis, Professor David Nutt at Imperial here, and one of the great experts on drugs, former head of the advisory committee to the government. And
Mm.
he said, look, cannabis started coming in and being monitored in 1963 by the Home Office. They were monitoring the strength of it and the availability of it. Here are 2 statistics: the amount of cannabis available from 63 to now, and the amount of people going into mental hospitals and having psychiatric disorders. Cannabis has gone up, psychiatric disorders have gone down. So it ain't causing psychosis.
Right. Right. Right.
But
Have you ever had Ethan Russo on?
no,
Oh, he's the great. He is a medical doctor. He is an actual rare genius. He is one of the world experts on cannabis in any dimension of it. And he speaks all over the world on sane policy and
mm,
on what's real. I mean, if you look at cannabis from a brain function standpoint, the cannabinoids cause our bodies to produce more neuroprotective factors.
yeah,
So whatever else is happening in terms of change of mood and mental state, one thing we know is that the nerves in the brain and the brain overall is better protected biochemically as a result of cannabis consumption.
yeah.
But
And
Ethan,
there was work released earlier this year on cannabinol, which
Mhm.
is, we have the THC, THCV, cannabidiol, but cannabinol, we have what, 2 endocannabinoid pathways in our bodies which control more functions than any other hormone or enzyme. And yet we're saying, oh no, you mustn't research this stuff, you mustn't find out anything about it.
Right. No, it's a weird situation, but in any case, I feel that the spell is pretty well broken in the
Mm.
U.S. Or certainly, we're not that far away from a reevaluation and a rescheduling of cannabis into the much safer zone. And you go to many parts of the country, and for that matter, some parts of the world, the police don't want to deal with this
Mm.
anymore. They're
Yeah.
done with it. There's no point in arresting somebody for smoking a joint on a park bench. That's just stupid. When there are people out there, robbing places, raping people. I mean, this is the stuff to worry about, not, oh my God, somebody got high and enjoyed it.
Yeah, and maybe if you gave some cannabis to the people who are robbing stuff and raping people, they wouldn't do that. It's like
Right, right,
the
right. It's
police
like,
should be going around giving people a spliff.
yeah, it's like everybody gets stoned and they go, hey, you want to go out and commit a robbery? And they're like,
Oh,
nah, no,
really?
man. Let's
No,
listen
man.
to this new Floyd album.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. So Ethan Russo, I will see if I can find him.
Yeah. If you can't readily get his info, I will send you his contact information. He's a bright guy. He's really talented. He's super articulate, and there's nothing I've ever found that he doesn't know about cannabis.
Mm,
So yeah, Ethan Russo, his
great,
info are to John. Yeah, I'll give you his contact info.
grand. So,
Introduce you.
tell me a little bit more about the project you're working on at the moment. People
Well,
you're working with.
it's really a global plant exploration program.
Oh,
And the idea is that together with my client who does botanical extraction, so just to clarify, in the natural supplement industry, in the herbal world, you have companies put out brands of all different kinds. So you have many branded companies in the UK like Viridian and others. And then you have the people who supply the ingredients. So it's very much like the car you drive, somebody supplied the glass for the windshield. You don't necessarily know who that is. I have been working for about the past 28 years with suppliers
Yeah.
and doing botanical exploration on their behalf. And we have this beautifully articulated program of basically going to every continent where there are plants of beneficial health value and investigating them, possibly for development, maybe to establish a chain of trade or just to understand the tradition and the circumstances around these plants. So it's kind of my ideal scenario, really, doing this, going to different continents, meeting growers. The plants give me the opportunity to to do this travel, but it's the people that really turn me on. So when I'm in a particular place, it's the farmers or it's the harvesters, the people who are working with these plants that I really get excited about. And when I get to go back repeatedly to projects, I wind up having these longer term relationships with people who become good friends. A few weeks ago, up in the Peruvian Andes, I got together with people I've known since '98. And it was quite a tearful reunion because I hadn't been up there in a few years, but wonderful, and to see them doing better as a result of the Maca trade and their communities thriving and their clothing is better and their housing is better and their roads are better and their transportation is better, all because of the plants. That's very, very satisfying.
Yeah, it has to be. It
Yeah.
has to be. And um, tell us something more about the particular plants that you've been investigating and their uses.
Lemon balm in southern France. I was at an extraordinary farm. The person who runs this company, I guess, has about 50 people working for them. They pay an incentive for people to come to work on bicycles. And the incentive is not a little bit, it's actually quite a lot. So, they generate most of their own power through solar, using entirely certified organic means of agriculture. And lemon balm itself is a calming agent.
Yeah.
So if you're stressed out, and obviously there are limits to how well this works. I mean, if somebody's really just ripped to the eyeballs, it might not help. But for people who are experiencing kind of, at average levels of stress and feeling ragged, when you take lemon balm, say as a nice concentrated tea or as a concentrated extract in supplement form, it calms you down. It just kind of takes the edge off things without any loss of mental clarity, without any distortion of the senses at all. So it was wonderful. I had not seen large scale, I'd seen small scale, but I had not seen large scale commercial farming of lemon balm. In Cameroon, it was one of many places that I have gone to for cocoa, for chocolate. I had an opportunity years ago to go see the Kuna people in the San Blas Islands off of the coast of Panama. And they're a widely studied group of natives because there are basically two groups of Kuna. One who eat a conventional diet, which includes a lot of processed foods, and one group of Kuna who are too poor even to afford those. So they live almost entirely on cocoa. And interestingly enough, they're the subject of ongoing decades of study from Harvard University and other medical institutions because they don't get heart attacks, stroke, high blood pressure, or 16 common forms of cancer.
Wow.
So, and they live on this very, very thick, like gravy thick
drink that they make with cocoa. What they do is
They fill it with water. They take a bunch of bananas, and I mean a bunch, and they throw them in and they boil them and boil them until they break up, and they stir them and just sort of whip them up, and then the bananas are kind of evenly dispersed throughout this big pot of water. And then they take maybe a kilo or so of hulled and roasted cocoa beans, grind them up, put them in there, cook it and cook it and cook it and cook it and cook it. And then they drink this stuff in big mugs. And it is, first of all, it's delicious. It's crazy delicious. And secondly, they live on this. They live on it. This is their diet. And as a result, they have no cardiovascular disease. So that has been fascinating to me. I mean, you said something earlier that was exactly right on, that it's the sugar in chocolate that is the problem for people. But I happen to have a real love for cocoa plantations because they're beautiful, and also because I happen to be like one of billions of people. I like chocolate, but it's been fascinating. I mean, I could say that chocolate without the sugar may be the single healthiest food you can put in your body.
Yeah.
It's way up there at the very least. It's certainly in the top 5 or 10. And I've been spending, of course, I'm heading back to France for the wine grape harvest in the Champagne region. And I know those French people, they're canny. They're going to try to get me to drink champagne. And okay, I'll have to do that. They keep trying to kill me with food and wine, and it doesn't work, John. It just doesn't work.
You probably have superpowers. That's probably what's protecting you.
I unquestionably possess superpowers. But and then also we'll go to the hops. About the wine grapes, a byproduct of the wine grape industry, of course, is the seeds. And the seeds have a skin around them, which is used to extract OPC. And OPC is a protective substance, a complex molecule that is exceptionally good for maintaining the strength of blood vessels, brain health, production of neuroprotective factors, reducing the risk of certain types of cancer. So I'll be seeing that harvest, and then we'll go on to the hops harvest. And while we mostly associate hops with beer for all the right reasons, it is loaded with anti-inflammatory compounds. And as I'm sure you know, every single chronic disease, whether it's tooth decay or diabetes, involves inflammation.
Yeah.
If you can keep inflammation in check, you can help to modify the severity of these conditions. I mean, obviously, if you've got, kidney disease, you may need to do more than just have an anti-inflammatory. If you've got, rotting teeth, you need to get them fixed. But hops contain very powerful groups of anti-inflammatory compounds. And the good thing about this is that the science on these things is spectacular now.
Yeah.
It used to be in the 70s that those of us who worked in the herbal field were called the fruits, nuts, and flakes. We were the, ridiculous people who couldn't get a job elsewhere, messing around with stuff that was just really kind of crackpot ideas and not real medicine. And now, of course, that equation's entirely different. You have companies like Bayer, GlaxoSmithKline, Centrum, and others putting out herbal products, just plain herbal products, because they realize, hey, these work and we want to be in on this. And the science is now very, very good. So we've had a real sea change in terms of our understanding of what plant-based remedies really are and what they can do.
I think this is a very important thing. I mean, I as a young hippie in the first thing I ever had published, and I didn't realize at the time, I wrote a letter to a magazine that was called Seed, which was a whole food magazine. And I was going through back issues about 2 years later, and I realized they'd published one of my letters when I say I was about 17 or 18. And so, my food journey began then with macrobiotics, which not something I'm particularly keen on anymore. Um, but that sort of, well, of course, what we eat is the foundation of our health.
Sure.
We need sleep, we need food, we need exercise. So I've become very interested in Tim Spector's work about ultra processed foods and them not being particularly good for us.
Right.
And my diet over the years has gone headed more and more towards leafy vegetables and stalks of things, and away from um, you know super abundant amounts of oil, which I don't, and by blood test I don't digest fats
Uh,
tremendously well. And I'm in a bizarre situation because I'm 69 years old, but my health is better now than it was 30 years ago.
uh-huh. Uh-huh.
I had digestive problems, which eventually I realized I was gluten intolerant. Um, and, so excluded gluten, but things still weren't right. And gradually tailoring the diet and saying, well, my system doesn't particularly like red meat. So
Mm.
I only eat it occasionally. Um,
Right.
I prefer to eat fish. I would rather grow as much of my food as I possibly can. This year has been a tragedy in that regard, save for raspberries and blackberries and loganberries and strawberries. We had wonderful crops of those, and we've had a good plum crop. We'll have a really good apple crop. But that difference, because my mum and dad were gardeners. We had a third of an acre. My dad was digging for victory still after World War II. And he had two periods of a couple of years where he was out of work by the time I was 19. And so we had to rely on a lot of food from the garden. So going out into the world at age 18 and finding out how badly people usually eat or were usually eating, and going,
Terrible.
there's another reason for this, that while all of that sugar and fat that's, um, titillating your palate is doing something, all of the subtlety of flavor is lost in it.
Mhm.
The differentiation. I've grown, I know, about 150 different varieties of tomato over the years. I know it's an unusual, but if you have something like a chocolate Cherokee or a purple Cherokee chocolate tomato, the flavor profile of these things, you can, in fact, it's said there are more flavors in tomatoes than any other species of food, of
Uh-huh.
plant, because you can get everything from kind of cheese flavors through to vinegars through to also honeys and papaya and what have you. And by growing those things, you realize that there is a delight in life that
Oh, yeah.
most people are just not experiencing. It's like they get their tin of baked beans and their pizza, and away they go. And there is such subtlety in food, such
Mm.
pleasure and delight in food that it's a shame. And everybody should grow some food. Everybody should, you know, realize the extent to which the discomfort they perhaps feel on a daily basis is because they're not taking in the chemicals they need to take in from their food. Um,
Sure. Sure.
and it,
Well, no, no, go ahead.
no, you go ahead, by all
Well,
means.
we're very fortunate because we live in a farming area.
Mm,
We're right by the Connecticut River, which has the Connecticut River Valley has, I think, the deepest topsoil in North America.
wow.
So we have hundreds of farms. We have what's called the Local Heroes program, and these farms are all part of that. So, like, we know, okay, there's that cart down Route 47, and now they've got the sweet corn in, and the Hadley asparagus season that just ended, and the berries, the pick your own berries on the way to Northampton, they're happening now, and the orchards are, still at least a month away from apple picking season. But there are all these growers and people who produce foods too. The artisanal cheeses. We've
Mhm.
got a chef and his wife who moved from New York City, and they grow hot peppers and they make sriracha sauce, and they make a number of other things that are beautiful. I mean,
Mm.
really exquisite products, and much beloved in this area. So we are exceptionally fortunate to have farm fresh crops, to have small growers in all directions.
Mm.
And in the fall, it's ridiculous.
The assortment of squash we have.
Yeah.
You know, all of the Japanese
Varieties are all grown here.
Mm.
Uh, and then the ones that you'd expect, acorn, butternut, Hubbard, etc. But
Turban, yeah.
yeah, I do feel for people who are entirely in urban areas who don't have exposure to farms and food cultivation because they're really cut off from a major dimension of healthy life.
Yeah, I was reading something the other week in New Scientist about a therapy that appears to be based upon taking a walk. Uh, it's like, wow, we've come to that now. And
Forest bathing.
well, that would be part of it. But yeah, of course we've had wild swimming. I'm not entirely sure about that, given the amount of pollution in our watercourses in this country. But this idea that you can go and look at some trees and some flowers and feel better, who'd have thought?
Right.
And realizing how insulated people have become. I mean, talking about kids, that I lived on the edge of a town as a kid, and we'd go out as a pack of kids and wander around in the countryside by the streams and pick our own watercress and what have you. And with my own kids, I have 4 kids, and the oldest of them at the age of 8 declared that he wanted a Game Boy, and that was that. And over my objection, got a Game Boy. And I don't think he's come out of it since. And that's like 30 years ago now. I mean, he's done very well in the world. He's happily married, has a beautiful child,
Sure.
has done well financially, all of that. But that connection, cut off their braids and lost some link with nature, as Joni Mitchell said of the native peoples around where she grew up.
Yep.
That just being part of it. And I think growing plants, even if you're just growing a herb on your windowsill, and that empathy that you develop, that feeling for the whole system of which we are part, rather than this artificial system into which we have been gradually moved over the last century or so. And I'm not a Luddite. I don't want to destroy the machinery. I'm not keen on the notion of the singularity. And I've seen Jean-Pierre Jeunet's great film Big Bug, which explains what artificial intelligence will ultimately do in a very comic fashion. But I am concerned at that disconnection from what is natural, and it's really reassuring to see pharmaceutical companies coming away from how elaborate a molecule can we make here, back to, oh yeah, people in Africa have been doing this for hundreds of years. Just get a bit of spider web and put it in the wound, what have you. So which means that the work that you and far too few other people are doing is incredibly valuable to the coming generation, I believe, and to dealing with climate change as well, of course. But no Russia.
Well, I have been invited and have spoken at Pfizer, GlaxoSmithKline, Merck, Roche, and some other pharma entities. And one thing I discovered was that every scientist in the room knew about this stuff. They all know the natural remedies. You start talking about an herb and somebody will say, yeah, is it the flavoglycosides in the ginkgo that are working, or do you think it's the terpene lactones? I mean, they are well informed. Their problem historically has been they can't patent this stuff.
Exactly.
If they can't patent it, they can't make billions. And finally, they've acquiesced and said, well, look, there's about $100 billion in herbs being sold out there. Let's have some of that business. So they've had a rethink. They still have to regard the herbs as less of profit centers than Viagra or whatever else they're selling. But there is that sea change going on. And when I mentioned, by the way, John, when I mentioned forest bathing in Japan, a walk in the woods is called forest bathing because trees, give off these absolutely microscopic, misty compounds, and they're doing so continually. And so when you walk in the woods, you're taking these into your body, and some of them are
Quite positive in terms of affecting brain function and
Mm.
so they're the Japanese they're an interesting culture, and they have chosen to call this forest bathing.
Forest bathing. Yeah.
Forest bathing. So it doesn't in fact have to do with throwing yourself into a pond. It
Mm.
has to do with walking through these, microscopic phytosomes that are raining down from trees all the time and taking them in, and how that helps to, in some ways, encourage better harmony, body and mind.
Mm.
But I'm fortunate. We walk in the woods every day. I'm right now looking out my back deck, and if you only saw this view, you'd think we live in a tree house, which basically we kind of do. It's our deck and forest.
Mm.
That's what it is. And we get bear, deer, possum, raccoons. We have a family of fox on our property,
Mm.
endless chipmunks, squirrels, the occasional eagles, birds of all different kinds. And what has happened is that because we're a safe property for these animals, more and more and more species show up. So we've got this kind of interesting, biodiverse little sort of animal sanctuary
Mm.
here in the woods. And we get the privilege of all of this natural activity. And it really, I know for us, we would miss it terribly if we didn't have this.
Yeah. I mean, my environment works on a smaller scale, that it's insect diversity, bird diversity. I'm on the edge of a large village. In America, it would be a town, seven,
Yeah,
8,000 people. But we have dragonflies and damselflies every year,
yeah,
and you really notice the variations in population.
sure.
We've had far fewer butterflies this year. But
Yeah.
yesterday, I have a decent camera, and I do take as many photos as I can, largely using a macro lens, so close-up photos. And most of what I do is in my garden because it's easy to travel to. Um,
Sure.
and there are plenty of things there. So it'll be flowers and bugs. And yesterday, for the first time, and this is 3 years of trying, I got a good shot of a dragonfly,
Uh,
because they don't sit still.
they don't. Yeah, I
Doesn't matter
know.
what you say to them. And this thing, I managed to get 10 photographs of it because it was just sat there going, yeah, you want some? And getting them in plane so that they're not out of focus and what have you. So I'm feeling rather smug, actually.
Well,
Uh,
that's great. Are
yeah,
you familiar with the photography of Roman Vishniac?
no, Roman
Oh, I
Vishniac.
don't think he's alive anymore, but he used to go out into marshes and fields and forests. He would find insects. He would bring them back to his studio. He would photograph them, and then he would troop back out to the exact spot where he got them and put them back.
But did
And
they get psychotherapy for the trauma he'd inflicted?
I'm sure that they were a little shook up. But yeah, Roman Vishniac, and he was a fascinating guy because he really had a love of insects, but he also had a tremendous protective sense of life in all
Mm.
sizes. And we've seen, for example, that as a result of having a good skunk population, possums, wild turkeys, and other creatures, we have no ticks on our property, and ticks are a huge problem for disease transmission, at least
Absolutely, they
in
are.
the region. We don't have them.
Mm.
I used to get slugs climbing up the sides of the cannabis plants. We don't have slugs this season because the little critters like to eat them.
Mm.
So we have a much healthier, balanced ecology. And yeah, a lot of dragonflies, although not as many as I would like.
It's hard to get as many as you'd like, isn't it?
I
And
know.
it's true. I mean, we have a small pond, so we have newts and we have frogs, and they don't keep. I want more of them because they don't eat enough slugs. But
Right, right, right.
But yeah, it's great having that diversity. Well, I think this is a good point for us to come to the end of our
Conclusion.
conversation, the
Right.
conclusion of our conversation. Um, it
Always good to speak with you, John. Always
yeah,
good. You're delightful and you are a fount of knowledge, and it's always a pleasure.
for me too, Chris. I mean, and I think the work you're doing is vital. I think it's just so incredibly important what you're doing.
Well,
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And I do hope that one of these days when I leap across the big pond, which I do pretty often, we can get together again.
Let's do it because I do have somewhere I can stay to get to see you, and
All right.
we will sort it. And how about we talk in a couple of months' time again?
That sounds great, John. You take really good care, okay?
Yeah, you too, my friend.
Thank you.
Cheers. Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much. You probably have superpowers. That's probably what's protecting you.
I unquestionably possess